The Crusades were religious military campaigns spanning nearly 200 years between 1096 and 1291. European Christians fought to conquer the Holy Land from Muslim control, creating centuries of conflict, reshaping Mediterranean civilization, trade, geopolitics, and religious relations fundamentally. 9 major crusades and countless smaller campaigns involved hundreds of thousands of warriors, pilgrims, and civilians across 3 continents. The Crusades represent one of history's most consequential religious conflicts, generating reverberations persisting into contemporary times through religious tensions, cultural divisions, and geopolitical antagonisms. Christianity and Islam had coexisted in the Mediterranean for 450 years before Crusades began in earnest. Muslim-Arab conquests in the 7th century transformed the religious geography of the Near East and North Africa. The Christian Byzantine Empire controlled Constantinople, the Mediterranean's economic center, and portions of Anatolia. Islamic caliphates ruled Egypt, Syria, Palestine, Mesopotamia, and North Africa. Christian pilgrims traveled regularly to Jerusalem, Christ's birthplace, under Muslim protection enforced through established agreements and commercial relationships. Trade flourished between Christian and Islamic ports as merchants found mutual benefit in commerce. Though religious tensions existed between faiths, coexistence was generally stable and economically beneficial for both Christian and Muslim merchants. Byzantine military weakness and territorial losses triggered the Crusades' origins directly. The Seljuk Turks, newly converted Muslims from Central Asia, invaded Anatolia during the 1070s with aggressive military campaigns. At the Battle of Manzikert in 1071, Byzantine forces were decisively defeated by Turkish cavalry using revolutionary composite bow technology. Turkish armies conquered vast Byzantine territories, threatening Constantinople itself and cutting off profitable eastern trade routes. Emperor Alexios I Komnenos, facing territorial devastation and potential empire collapse, appealed desperately to Western Europe for military assistance in 1095. He expected mercenary assistance and limited military support, not the massive religious war mobilization that erupted across Europe. Pope Urban II transformed Alexios' military request into a religious crusade of unprecedented scale. At the Clermont Council in 1095, Urban preached holy war against Muslim infidels, occupying Christ's birthplace and threatening Christian access to sacred sites. He promised crusaders full remission of sins, spiritual salvation, heavenly rewards, and possible territorial gains in conquered lands. Urban's powerful rhetoric transformed what could have been a mercenary military expedition into a sacred religious mission, appealing to piety, greed, and adventure simultaneously. Knights seeking redemption for violent sins, younger sons seeking land inheritance impossible in Western Europe, merchants seeking new trade opportunities, and the genuinely pious responded enthusiastically to crusade calls. The concept of holy war for religious purposes was revolutionary in medieval Europe, legitimizing violence against non-Christians as divine service approved by the Church. The First Crusade began in 1096 with approximately 100,000 organized warriors and perhaps 200,000 additional pilgrims, clergy, and camp followers. Organization was chaotic and improvised throughout the campaign. Different armies assembled separately from different regions without unified command structure or logistics coordination. Supply lines were non-existent, creating starvation and disease throughout the journey. Many crusaders died from disease, malnutrition, and attacks by Armenian populations and bandits during the treacherous journey to Holy Land. Peasant crusaders arrived completely unprepared for Middle Eastern warfare, unfamiliar climate, and desert conditions. Yet despite tremendous disorganization and casualties, Crusader forces succeeded militarily against expectations through determination and European heavy cavalry advantages. Crusaders defeated Turkish armies decisively at Nicaea in 1097, employing heavy cavalry charges and medieval siege techniques previously unknown in Near Eastern warfare. They crossed Anatolia through hostile territory, suffering tremendous hardships and casualties from heat, disease, and starvation. At Antioch in 1098, Crusaders endured a horrific 5-month siege during which starvation threatened the entire army's survival. Desperate Crusaders ate horses, then dogs, then potentially engaged in cannibalism according to some accounts. A Turkish relief army was defeated through morale-boosting discovery of a holy relic supposedly containing the true cross. Jerusalem fell to Crusader assault in July 1099 after weeks of siege. Crusaders massacred the city's entire Muslim and Jewish populations in an unprecedented orgy of religious violence, possibly killing 70,000 people. Streets literally ran with blood as Crusaders waded through bodies. The Jerusalem conquest horrified the Islamic world, generating hatred and desire for revenge that motivated resistance for centuries. Crusaders established 4 Crusader states in conquered territories to maintain control over newly conquered lands. The Kingdom of Jerusalem became the primary Crusader state, controlling the most sacred Christian sites. The county of Tripoli controlled coastal Syria. The county of Antioch controlled northern Syria and Cilicia. The county of Edessa controlled Mesopotamia. However, these Crusader states were extremely vulnerable military enclaves in fundamentally hostile territory. Most conquered land remained Muslim-controlled, with Crusader territories surrounded by Islamic powers. Crusaders comprised a tiny military elite numbering perhaps 50,000 permanent settlers, ruling a Muslim peasant majority numbering hundreds of thousands. Their survival depended absolutely on naval superiority provided by Italian merchant republics, Venice, Genoa, and Pisa, who transported Crusaders, supplied armies, and provided logistical support. In exchange for military protection, Italian merchants received trade monopolies, tax exemptions, and colonial trading posts, establishing Mediterranean commerce networks. Crusader-Muslim coexistence developed pragmatically in conquered territories over decades. Practical necessity required cooperation and peaceful coexistence despite religious differences. Crusaders adopted local customs, dress, language, and some cultural practices from resident populations. Intermarriage occurred between Crusader nobles and local Arab, Christian, and Muslim families, creating mixed heritage populations. Crusader knights adopted Muslim military tactics, weaponry, and architectural fortification designs. Crusaders maintained diplomatic relations with neighboring Islamic powers, negotiating trade agreements and military alliances against common enemies. Trade flourished in Crusader ports as Italian merchants facilitated commerce between Western Europe and Asia. However, periodic warfare erupted when outside armies invaded Crusader territories or when religious fervor overwhelmed pragmatic coexistence instincts. The Second Crusade erupted after Turkish armies recaptured Edessa in 1144, demonstrating Crusader territorial fragility. Pope Eugenius III called for holy war led by King Louis VII of France and King Conrad III of Holy Roman Empire, combining France and Germany's greatest powers. Massive armies marched to Holy Land, but suffered catastrophic defeat at the Horns of Hattin in 1187 by the brilliant military commander Saladin. Saladin employed deception, superior cavalry tactics, and psychological warfare to completely destroy Crusader armies. 70% of Crusaders were killed or captured. Saladin systematically conquered Crusader territories afterward, retaking Jerusalem in October 1187 after 88 years of Christian control. The Crusader states shrank to isolated coastal enclaves barely connected to each other. Crusaders' devastating defeats shocked Europe, triggering response from the most powerful European rulers who organized massive counteroffensive. The Third Crusade, 1189–1192, brought Richard the Lionheart of England, King Philip Augustus of France, and Frederick Barbarossa of Holy Roman Empire, Europe's three greatest monarchs and military commanders. Richard proved himself a military genius, winning naval superiority, defeating Saladin at Arsuf in 1191, and recapturing crucial coastal territories. However, Crusaders failed to recapture Jerusalem despite enormous military effort. Saladin's superior tactical abilities and diplomatic skill prevented complete Crusader victory. Richard's health deteriorated, and Crusaders faced supply problems maintaining armies far from home. Richard negotiated treaty with Saladin allowing Christian pilgrims safe access to Jerusalem, while Muslims maintained territorial control. Richard returned to Europe having achieved limited military success despite enormous effort, expenditure, and casualties. The Fourth Crusade, 1204–1261, marked the Crusade era's darkest chapter and greatest atrocity. Venetian merchants diverted Crusaders away from Holy Land toward Constantinople, a fellow Christian city, to install a favorable Byzantine emperor and gain monopoly control of eastern Mediterranean trade routes. Crusaders sacked Constantinople in 1204, massacring civilians indiscriminately, looting treasures accumulated over 1,000 years, and destroying priceless religious artifacts. The Latin Empire was established, ruled by Crusaders and Venetian merchants. Byzantine Orthodox Christians viewed this Crusader betrayal as worse than any Muslim conquest, and the event catalyzed permanent religious schism between Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox Christianity. The religious breach deepened irreparably, lasting to present day. The Fourth Crusade demonstrated how Crusade movements' religious ideals had been corrupted by merchant greed and political ambition. The Fifth Crusade, 1217–1221, attempted reconquest through Egyptian campaigns, recognizing Egypt as Islamic world's economic and military heart. Crusaders captured Damietta, crucial Egyptian port, but failed to capture Cairo despite reaching it. Supply lines broke, disease devastated armies, and Muslim reinforcements defeated Crusaders. Crusaders retreated, losing Damietta. The campaign wasted enormous resources without achieving objectives, demonstrating Crusaders' inability to defeat unified Islamic resistance in enemy territory. The Sixth Crusade, 1228–1229, led by Frederick II, took unusual diplomatic approach. Frederick negotiated with Egyptian Sultan, trading military withdrawal for Jerusalem's return and Christian pilgrim access. Frederick crowned himself king of Jerusalem without military conquest, achieving through diplomacy what warfare could not accomplish. However, this peaceful settlement aroused papal anger because it violated Crusade ideology requiring military conquest and religious conversion. The Pope excommunicated Frederick for insufficient crusading fervor. This crusade demonstrated Crusade's transformation from religious necessity to political tool. The Seventh Crusade, 1248–1254, led by King Louis IX of France, attacked Egypt again. Crusaders captured Damietta but were defeated and captured at Mansura. Louis was ransomed for enormous payment. The crusade accomplished nothing despite massive expenditure. Despite repeated failures, Crusade ideology remained powerful in European consciousness. The Eighth Crusade, 1270, led again by Louis IX, attacked Tunis expecting easy victory. Disease devastated Crusader armies before any significant fighting occurred. Louis died of plague. Crusaders retreated without accomplishing any military objectives. This crusade represented dying gasps of organized crusade movement. The Children's Crusade in 1212 demonstrated crusade movement's religious fanaticism reaching dangerous extremes. Believing children possessed spiritual purity, enabling divine assistance where adult warriors failed. Massive groups of children numbering tens of thousands marched toward Holy Land without supplies, military training, or adult protection. Most died from disease, starvation, or exposure during journey. Those reaching Mediterranean ports were allegedly enslaved by merchants. None reached Holy Land. This catastrophe illustrated Crusade movement's complete detachment from reality and willingness to sacrifice human lives for religious ideology. The ninth and final major crusade, 1289–1291, attempted to recover Crusader territories in Syria. However, this crusade never materialized beyond planning stages. The final Crusader stronghold at Acre fell to Muslim forces in 1291 after months of siege. With Acre's fall, the Crusader state ceased existing entirely. After 200 years of military campaigns, enormous expenditure of wealth and lives, and repeated military efforts, Crusaders were completely expelled from Holy Land. The Crusade movement had fundamentally failed militarily despite religious enthusiasm and repeated mobilization efforts. Crusades transformed military technology and tactics substantially. European knights encountered different warfare styles and technologies vastly different from European experience. They adopted Middle Eastern siege equipment, architectural fortification designs featuring multiple defensive layers, and tactical innovations. Crusaders returned with knowledge of Eastern military superiority in cavalry tactics, composite bow technology, and siege engineering. Naval warfare advanced dramatically through Crusader campaigns as Mediterranean fleets engaged in unprecedented naval battles. Italian merchant republics developed advanced ship designs enabling reliable transportation of supplies, troops, and equipment across Mediterranean. This maritime technological innovation eventually enabled European colonial expansion centuries later when these ship technologies were improved further. Cultural and intellectual exchange accompanied military conflict throughout Crusade era. Crusaders encountered Islamic mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy vastly superior to European knowledge. Arabic numerals, algebra, and scientific texts were translated into Latin from captured libraries. European scholars studied Muslim physicians like Averroes and Avicenna, whose medical knowledge exceeded European practitioners by centuries. Astronomical knowledge preserved in Islamic civilization influenced European scientific development. This intellectual transmission helped drive European Renaissance by reintroducing classical knowledge preserved by Islamic civilization when Western Europe had lost it. Medicine, astronomy, mathematics, and engineering advanced through Crusader-era knowledge transfer from Islamic world. Religious military orders emerged specifically to support and sustain Crusade efforts. The Knights Templar were warrior monks combining monastic religious discipline with military prowess and training. They provided banking services, loaning money to pilgrims, crusaders, and nobles. Templars accumulated enormous wealth through Crusade era by managing funds, controlling trading posts, and holding property. The Knights Hospitaller similarly combined religious devotion with military service in hospital administration. Both orders participated in crusades while establishing independent power structures rivaling king's authority. Their wealth, independence, and military capabilities made them targets of royal jealousy and fear. Eventually, European kings moved against these orders, particularly King Philip IV of France against the Templars, destroying them partly through force and partly through accusations of heresy and devil worship. Trade networks expanded dramatically through Crusade era, fundamentally reshaping Mediterranean commerce. Italian merchant republics established trading posts throughout Mediterranean and Near Eastern ports. Venetian and Genoese merchants achieved economic dominance over Mediterranean commerce previously controlled entirely by Islamic powers. Direct sea routes between Western Europe and Eastern Mediterranean facilitated luxury trade in previously inaccessible goods. Spices, silks, perfumes, and Eastern goods flooded European markets, creating markets for exotic products. This economic shift enriched Italian merchant classes tremendously and funded Renaissance cultural development through merchant family patronage. The commercial revolution's foundations were established partly through Crusade-era trade expansion and the wealth accumulated through these networks. Islamic world responded to crusades with religious renewal and military reorganization. The concept of jihad, holy war against infidels and invaders, became central to Islamic identity and religious obligation. Great Muslim leaders like Saladin unified fragmented Islamic territories against Crusader threat, creating unprecedented military cooperation. Islamic civilization developed new military technologies and tactics responding to Crusader technological advantages. Islamic scholars studied European military engineering and tactics to improve defensive capabilities. The Crusades hardened religious boundaries between Christianity and Islam, creating cultural divisions persisting to present day. Muslims developed lasting resentment, viewing Crusaders as foreign invaders attempting to impose Western Christianity through force. European society was transformed profoundly by Crusade participation and consequences. Thousands of knights died in Crusades, disrupting feudal hierarchies and inheritance patterns. Land and wealth redistributed as noble families died out in Crusades without producing heirs. The power of papacy reached its peak during Crusade era, demonstrating churches' ability to mobilize entire populations for religious wars, only to decline afterward when crusades failed repeatedly. Crusades demonstrated papacy's authority limits despite religious authority. Merchants and seafarers gained power as crusade logistics required unprecedented trade and transportation networks. Urban centers grew substantially as crusade preparation, military bases, and trade operations concentrated there. The balance of power shifted from feudal nobility toward merchants, seafarers, and urban centers. This power redistribution contributed to feudalism's eventual decline. Anti-Jewish violence accompanied crusade campaigns systematically. Crusaders massacred European Jewish communities, viewing them as infidels deserving death like Muslims. Thousands of Jews were murdered during crusade mobilization as crusaders attacked Jewish quarters en route to Mediterranean ports. European kingdoms institutionalized Jewish persecution through restrictive laws, discriminatory taxation, and forced segregation in ghettos. This Crusade-era antisemitism established patterns of Jewish persecution persisting through medieval and early modern periods. Crusades thus weaponized religious identity against multiple groups, not merely Muslims. Crusades failed militarily but succeeded culturally, economically, and geopolitically. Military conquests proved temporary. Crusaders could not maintain permanent territorial control against superior Islamic forces and could not sustain supply lines from distant Western Europe. However, cultural exchanges transferred knowledge, transforming European civilization fundamentally. Trade networks established during Crusade era drove European prosperity and funding for Renaissance development. Maritime technology developed for Crusades enabled later European colonial expansion when improved further. The Crusades accelerated European transition from feudalism toward merchant capitalism by enriching merchant classes and establishing global trade networks. Crusade legacy shaped European Islamic relations for centuries afterward. Muslims viewed European expansionism as continuation of Crusade-era imperialism and religious aggression. Europeans increasingly viewed Muslims as permanent enemies requiring military conquest and religious conversion. This religious hostility, established during Crusade era, influenced European colonial expansion throughout Americas, Africa, and Asia. Crusades institutionalized the concept of religious warfare as legitimate state policy, a principle extending beyond medieval period. European conquistadors justified American conquests using Crusade-era religious rhetoric. The Crusades created template for European imperialism, justified through religious ideology. Contemporary geopolitical conflicts echo Crusade-era antagonisms. Modern Middle Eastern tensions partly derive from Crusade-era religious animosity. The Crusades represent formative conflict shaping Christian-Islamic relations fundamentally. Some Islamic extremist groups explicitly reference crusades to justify violence against Western nations. Some Western politicians employ crusade rhetoric when discussing Middle Eastern conflicts. The historical memory of crusades influences contemporary religious identity and political conflicts throughout Mediterranean region and Middle East. The final crusade concept faded by 1300 as papal authority declined substantially. Later European military campaigns against Islamic powers were framed as colonial expansion rather than religious crusades. Yet the ideology of crusading, viewing military conquest as religious obligation and divine service, influenced European conquests of Americas. Spanish conquest of Mexico and Peru were justified using Crusade-era religious rhetoric. Conquistadors viewed indigenous Americans as infidels requiring conversion or death, applying Crusade ideology to new territories. Portuguese colonial expansion in Africa similarly employed Crusade rhetoric justifying conquest as spreading Christianity. The Crusades remain historically significant despite complete military failure. They accelerated European development by facilitating knowledge transfer from Islamic civilization, establishing trade networks connecting Europe to Asia, developing maritime technology enabling global exploration, and concentrating economic power in merchant classes. They permanently altered European Islamic relations, establishing religious hostility influencing subsequent centuries. They demonstrated religion's power to mobilize populations, legitimize military violence, and create lasting antagonisms across civilizations. The Crusades marked the transition from medieval feudal Europe toward early modern merchant capitalism and European global dominance. Their consequences reverberate through contemporary geopolitical conflicts, religious tensions, and cultural antagonisms. Understanding the Crusades remains essential for comprehending modern religious conflicts and Western Islamic relations.